I think we always expect the next Battlefield game to have some stunning work of art created by the team at DICE Stockholm. And I don't think anyone can really argue that since the switch to the Frostbite engine with Battlefield 1943, DICE really has delivered game after game, pushing forward on graphical fidelity. The games, every time they come out, look better than the last one. It's one of the cornerstones of the franchise now, I'd say, and any game that doesn't leap forward is perhaps considered a little bit of a misstep. And Battlefield 2018 will be no exception, according to EA at least. In a recent earnings call, the game got a very brief mention from EA CEO Andrew Wilson, and we got some solid confirmation of the time frame for its release by the CFO, Blake Jorgensen. He confirmed that the game is due to be released in fiscal year 2019. That starts on April the 1st, 2018, and runs all the way through until March 31st, 2019. Now, most mainline Battlefield titles, they release in the October window of any given fiscal year. Battlefield 3, Battlefield 4, and Battlefield 1 all followed this route. Spin-off titles like Battlefield Hardline and Battlefield Bad Company 2, they tend to be offset from this October window. Although Hardline was slated for an October 2014 launch, it actually released in March 2015 because the game was delayed. The impact of releasing a game in the October window compared to the March window can be rather profound, and it can also signal the intent from a publisher on how much they really believe in the title that's being released. If you see any game that's being released anywhere from September to December within a fiscal year, then I think we all understand the publisher is looking to really hit the market hard, sell huge amounts of copies, and attract as much of an audience as they can. They want to hit that sweet spot around the run-up to Christmas and Christmas itself, and that makes sound business sense. Releasing a game in March is always, to my eyes, a bit more of a risk, or you might want to slightly play down the expectations for your title. You'll find on average consumers are less likely to part with their cash at that time of the year, as they're still recovering from their big spend at Christmas time. This kind of message from EA at the moment, saying simply the game is coming within a 12-month window, is really no big surprise to anybody. They have investors to reassure, and announcing any kind of release date so prematurely might negatively affect their business in the short term. It also gives them a 12-month window to move the game around a little bit if development requires it. But I fully expect the next Battlefield game to be launching in the September to December window of the year 2018. That's roughly 12 months from now. But let's move on now to that mention of the next Battlefield game from EA CEO Andrew Wilson on this investor call. His quote directly in his closing statement is that the game will be visually stunning and deeply immersive. Now, this kind of comment, it does not surprise me one single bit. At this stage, with the setting of the game, the scope of the game, the content, or literally any detail whatsoever not being released, this kind of comment is purely to hype up the game a tad to its investors, who were of course listening to the call, and the rest of the gaming community who follow the franchise and wait for news about their favourite games. It certainly caught me by surprise, however, when the quote was reported by several different news websites. I wasn't really expecting any mention of it at all, because it's still so far away. But we did get one for Battlefield 2018. Of course, any mention of the next Battlefield game, and I'm going to get excited, and I'm sure many people out there as well will be excited for the next title. But I do have an issue with the quote, and it's an issue that I've had with a few past Battlefield titles as well. Sometimes, visual fidelity and graphical immersion, they cloud the release of the game, and then we see graphical rollbacks happen maybe a few months after launch. For example, Battlefield 4 had a graphical addition called Visual Recoil. It exaggerated the recoil of weapons and almost shook the sights of weapons further across the screen than where the bullets were actually going. And this gave an awesome sense of authenticity, explosions going off, your screen shaking, your aim going everywhere. It seems really awesome, but it wasn't conducive to good gameplay, and it often left players wondering why their bullets were landing somewhere different to where their sights might have indicated. This was an issue for some time in the game, and eventually DICE managed to roll back the addition and bring the recoil control back to their true values. This made the game look awesome on release, with some awesome camera shake, massive recoil on weapons, truly cinematic stuff, but it was detrimental to gameplay, and it took a while for that thing to be taken out. Battlefield 3 suffered from horrendous suppression effects almost throughout its entire life cycle. The effect was just so damn extreme that it looked like somebody had smeared Vaseline all over your screen when somebody was firing at you. Again, this might have looked awesome in trailers, pre-release content, and the like, and might have helped sell more copies of the game with pretty visual effects, but again, it affected gameplay extremely negatively. This issue was never fully resolved, and many players just simply learned to live with it, but the next game in line, Battlefield 4, they certainly toned down the visual effects of suppression. Now, surprisingly, Battlefield 1 didn't have as many of these graphical issues at launch, and the issues have actually come after the launch, with various additions to the game and updates and patches that have come along the line. Perhaps the only issue you could say at launch for Battlefield 1 is the horrendous amount of screen shake, and that's actually one of the things that DICE fixed post-launch. The game had other issues at that time, like a lack of true content within the first 6 months of its life cycle, and a weapon customization system that left many people feeling like they'd had all of their choices taken away. But in recent months, as I said, recent additions to the game, graphically, have left many people wanting some changes, and DICE is now getting round to fixing them. I mentioned a screen shake fix. A slider has been introduced to the game back in the summer to tone down some of the extreme movements when mass amounts of explosions are going off at once. You can now reduce it to a minimum of 30%, and I think it was set to 80% at the start of the game, which is why I immediately set it to 30%. Another issue, various medic rifles have been added to the game with DLC packs, and they give off extreme amounts of barrel smoke when they're fired, and this would cloud the vision of the person firing, and potentially lead them to lose their target. This effect looks awesome in third person when you're looking at a medic and their gun is recoiling and puffing out smoke, but it's less than ideal when the person firing loses their target and potentially dies because of that. DICE has now implemented a change that almost completely removes the smoke from first person, and that makes it much easier for medics to track their targets effectively. So a good change overall, but again, if you look back at the launch, it was still an issue there, but there were just less weapons in the game, so perhaps the issue was less pronounced. And just very recently, with the launch of the Tsar DLC, and for a reason that no one can really understand why, DICE added chromatic aberration and film grain to Battlefield 1. 95% of people don't want that stuff making their game look all fuzzy, and it wasn't there before, and it was implemented without a toggle to turn it off, which is really, really frustrating. If you're going to add visual effects to a game, at least give me the option to turn them off if I don't want them. Don't make them mandatory. But to DICE's credit, in the next patch that came out, a toggle was implemented, and again, immediately, I turned those things off. My overall point here is that despite what Mr. Wilson is saying about Battlefield 2018 being visually stunning and deeply immersive, I'd like to see a Battlefield launch that focuses more on the gameplay aspect and have that put at the forefront, and for once, not try and wow us with over-the-top fancy graphics. As I said in the intro to this video, I think the entire Battlefield community simply now expects each game that releases to look amazing anyway. So instead of pushing those new effects to the forefront, how about some greater detail on new gameplay mechanics, new team play points, and overall performance improvements? Battlefield 1 has made some brilliant strides in these areas recently on the CTE, and it would be great to see some of these things added to the launch of Battlefield 2018, as opposed to having to wait for a patch 3 or 6 months after the launch to see those core features arrive. But there we are, that's just my opinion on this mention of Battlefield 2018. I'm tired of going through this cycle of seeing insanely awesome graphics, but a detriment to the gameplay every time a game releases, so perhaps we can see that switched round and maybe focus more on the gameplay aspects. Maybe leave some of your thoughts and comments down below in the comments section today, and of course, I'll be down there reading as many as I can. But until next time, my name is Westy, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.